Since 1941, more than 2.5 million fans have heeded the advice of Harry Carey and have clicked the turnstiles to see the stars of tomorrow. Over 100 Jamestown players have graduated to the big show, with Nellie Fox being the only one to go from Jamestown to Cooperstown. Since 1941, the Jamestown professional baseball teams have been blessed with some terrific managers. One of them was Greg Malevy, who successfully coached in 1941 and 42. 1946 through 1949 saw the Falcons being managed by Marv Olson. (1951, 1952, and 1955 saw the very popular and very successful Tony Lupian. However, nobody eclipsed the popularity of Pat Daugherty, who was here for a total of 6 years as manager, and prior to that as coach. Let's hear Pat's story. Hey, how did you find your way to Jamestown, New York? It was 1977, wasn't it?
I came first in 1973. I came as coach for Walt Reniak in 19. What had happened, Greg, I started in Jim Fanning, Mel Didier then was, who's now the farm director of the new Diamondback Club. I managed Sarasota, Florida, well, actually Cocoa Beach, Florida in 1992. 1972. And I managed them to the worst record they ever had. And I was going to mention that tonight. I think I had a 9-60 record. We lost 23 straight games in July. But then I used to tell the people back home, and that was my first year, and I thought, I thought I was the Leo DeRocher and Casey Stengel. I thought I was everybody. That this was going to be easy. I'm going to move right through professional baseball. And surprisingly enough, Gary Carter was my catcher on that club. And Ellis Valentine, who should have had a great career, and then got into the cocaine and stuff. But anyway, when I went back home with that record, I told the people back home, because they was following in Sporting News, I said, isn't it terrible that a paper as reputable as the Sporting News can get a guy's record turned around? But I blew that leg out of the water in 72, and we dropped obviously, we dropped, in fact, the league folded. That was called the East Coast Gulf Coast League, and there was 4 clubs in it. So I came up here as a coach with Walt Reniak in 73. 74 I went to West Palm. 75 I went to Lethbridge, Alberta, Canada. And I'm trying to think, Greg, my mind's leaving me, if I came here in 76 or 77.
77.
77 was my first year. Hi, Greg, this is Pat Daugherty. I got your letter and finally found a moment or two here to respond, and I appreciate you including me in your Jamestown Expo history. And I'm going to just kind of try to bring back some of the things that I can remember happened. I had many great years there. One funny thing, John Connell, who was a backup catcher for us, and I don't remember exactly the year, but got to play very, very little. And the one night I was going to play him, he was all excited. They're playing the national anthem, and the pitcher and everybody runs out to the mound, and I don't see John Connell. And about that time, the little kid from the clubhouse come running up, screaming that a fan just told him somebody's locked in the locker room. And I sent the trainer out, and what had happened, John Connell was so nervous, right when they started playing the national anthem, he ran in the locker room, and one of the fans come by and saw the padlock was unlocked and in the half, so he just locked the padlock, and luckily John Connell didn't miss one of the few games he got to start, but we had a big laugh over that. In the early years, we had a catcher named Mitch Cipolla. Was a young high school kid that came there to catch, and he had a history of doing the unusual. One night we had a rain delay, and we were all in the locker room, and finally a couple of players come in out of the dugout and said the game's been called. It's just been announced over the PA system. And almost immediately after that, the two umpires come into the room furious, wanting to know who called the game. And I said, well, I figured you did. You guys are in charge of it. And he said, no, somebody else called the game. And finally someone said that Mitch Cipolla was up in the PA box. Well, Mitch said he had always wanted to be a TV or a radio or TV announcer, and he was just trying his voice out on the PA and made the announcement that tonight's game's canceled. So we lost a game because Mitch was trying to further his broadcasting career. Another interesting story, Bob Hartsfield coached at Auburn several of those years that I was at Jamestown, and we were probably the two oldest managers in the league. And in the early years, that league had a lot of real young umpires. They didn't have the umpire training that they've got in this day and age. Those kids would go down to L. Somers baseball camp for a summer, and they'd throw their name in the hat, and the best of the worst would be selected, and they'd be assigned to the first-year baseball clubs. But one particular game at Jamestown, when the grounds crew was behind time and they were hurrying, trying, on our grounds crew in those early years consisted of one man. But as we go out to try to get the ground rules at 7 o'clock for a 7:05 game, behind home plate, kind of off on the grass, the groundsman had his wheelbarrow, and it had the old bases in it, and it had his field marker and a bunch of material in it. And spontaneously, Bob Hartsfield turned to me and said, how are we going to play the wheelbarrow here off the grass? And I said, like we always play it. You know, if it gets in the wheelbarrow, the ball's dead. If it gets into the wheelbarrow and bounces out, we're going to play it. Now the two young umpires are looking at one another like, I've never heard this in my life. So one of the umpires said to the other, we're not going to have that wheelbarrow out here during the game. We're going to have someone move it. But Bob Hartsfield and I laugh about that to this day. One other thing I think happened in '90. We were on, you're on candid camera, and the TV crew from New York came in. I remember.
Jamestown, New York, home of the Jamestown Expos. And the Expos field is going to be the setting later tonight for one of the most unusual candid camera sequences we've ever tried.
Because we was fighting for a playoff spot with Erie. So Tom O'Reilly says, I got a great idea. I got a call from Candid Camera. This 10 o'clock in the morning. He said, they want to come over here. And I said, what in the hell would they want to come to Jamestown, New York? He said, well, they want to do something on minor league baseball. And I said, they got some teams, you know, they got some clubs. The Mets have got a club. I think the Mets then were at Fall. I don't know exactly what town it was. He said, I don't know, but they want to come here and do it. And I said, well, Tom, I'll tell you, you better check with the front office. I said, who knows? So anyway, he says, I'll check. He called back and said, I said, I got no problem with it. He calls back and said, Montreal said it's fine. So when Peter's telling me what they're going to do, I'm thinking, that ain't going to go. But, yeah, it's not going to. It's going to be. So he told Juan Lopez was managing Niagara Falls, and we were in the race then with Erie. Shit, we was going right down to the thing where, and I thought, this is going to screw everything up. I mean, we were like a half a game back, and we had a doubleheader. This was in between games of a doubleheader. And nobody noticed that the two umpires did the first game. When he come out, nobody noticed the difference. I'm going to do it. He says, you know, I don't. He said, that's going to make Baxter mad. And so only Hargis knew it, the catcher. I knew it, and Juan Lopez was managing Niagara Falls. Nobody else knew it.
I came in for the first game and walked into the press box, and the next box to us was all this TV equipment. Now, we're used to TV equipment up there with the stations in Erie, once in a while a Buffalo station, will be down there with shoulder-held cameras. But this was big stuff. This is big cameras on a tripod and so forth. And they had, as I recall, about 3 cameras.
A fellow named Bob Baxter. Now, what Baxter doesn't know is that his catcher is working tonight for the candid camera. And I'm going to pose as the home plate umpire. Now, whenever Baxter tries to throw a pitch, his catcher is going to confuse him with hand signals he's never seen before. In a few hours, there'll be several thousand people here, and of course, they won't know what's going on either.
Now game time is approaching and the crowd files in. Out on the field, pitcher Bob Baxter is taking his warm-ups with catcher Dan Hargis. I'm behind the plate. One other thing, up in the press box, the game is being broadcast live on local radio station WJTN. Now, the 2 fellas doing the play-by-play have no idea about the candid camera stunt that will soon occur.
Well, then there's confusion between the pitcher and the catcher, so let's get together.
How can you get messed up on the first signal of the ball game?
Three, slider, will it say? All right, cool.
It's ridiculous. I mean, this is the 48th game of the season, fans. If you don't have your signal straight by this time, I mean, you open up with a fastball. 9 times out of 10.
Time! What's going on here, Ted? Come down. Huh? You put down a number, though. Just a minute. What is going on out there? Not putting down numbers, just putting down... I don't know what it is. How long you 2 guys play together? You know the signals. Let's go. We've never done that before. What? Right signals? Come on now. Fellas, we've been out here 5 minutes. We haven't thrown a pitch yet. We'll put down the numbers. I don't know what we're doing. You did. You just missed it. I don't know what that is, then. That's not illegal. It's not illegal. No, the fingers. That's it. Do you think you can do this now? We're going to get your manager out here and get you out of this game, fella. I don't know what these are, Dan. Hey, make sure you keep an eye on me now. I'm watching you.
We haven't started the ball game yet.
I tell you, maybe it's time for Baxter to get himself a set of glasses. They ought to take him to the optometrist tomorrow to get him examined. As Hargis, evidently not the culprit, he doesn't seem to believe it either for some reason.
I don't understand what's going on here. I absolutely don't understand. Looks like Baxter is ready. He's looking in, and he's still nodding no. Still nodding no, and I don't know what he's doing. He's still nodding no. As if he can't see or something. His time is gone.
Now the home plate umpire is going to go over and talk to management, I believe, or they're going to put him on base.
It's good news for the refreshment stand. You folks sit down there in the refreshment area. Stay in line. We haven't started the ball game yet.
I don't have all night to play this game.
Well, he's pitched since you were a little league?
He's not giving me numbers.
Who is he?
Yeah, he's like going like this, like this, like this. Wait, what? He's not putting down numbers. Oh, no, wait, hey, you get back behind the plate.
Our team didn't know what the hell was going on.
You're not giving any numbers? What's he doing?
He told him to give me numbers, I'll throw it.
And what's he giving you?
He's giving me this and this and this.
What does that mean?
No idea.
What? You don't know what it means? Just a minute, I'll run you out of here. What does it mean? What does this mean?
No idea. I have no idea.
Are you going to throw a pitch tonight, or are we going to stand here and talk about it?
It's not a one. I'll throw a fastball.
Are you going to play ball?
Of course I am.
Yeah, I'm going to give you one more chance to have this fella play ball. Otherwise, we're going to run him out of here.
Yeah, I got him out. I don't have any more pitches.
Well, we're going to forfeit.
One.
All right, let's go. Let's go.
Okay, we're still waiting the first pitch. We're getting time called again. And now the umpire again going out to talk to the pitcher. And he pointed, he's out of there. He threw Baxter out of the ball game.
Throw him out of the game. Look at back. He just dropped the ball and walked off.
He threw Baxter out of the ball game. one of the most unbelievable things in the history of professional baseball we're seeing right here.
My name's Peter Funtz, and I do the Candid Camera show, Bob. And we just caught you on Candid Camera. Now, there's the camera up there taking your picture. And you are one of the nicest guys we've ever caught on Candid Camera, although you're shaking like a leaf.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'd like you all to smile because you and the Expos are on Candid Camera.
Candid Camera, folks, and we've all been taken.
Well, I guess we have.
And
We
I mean
sucked
it.
right into it, believe me. They did a great job.
Remember that all, Pete?
Oh, yes. Very fortunate that Skip didn't come out with one of his famous "goddammits." He was very close. He gets it.
We're going to travel into Canada to play one of the teams, and they didn't have their passports, so the border guards pulled them off, and I'm thinking, how can we leave these two young kids sitting on a curb in Niagara Falls? And anyway, we went on into Canada, and they sit there until we came back. I couldn't get anybody hold of anybody in our office, but they sit there, and we came back through. They were still in their uniforms, sitting on the curb, waiting for us to pick them up. Some of the things I don't want to remember, I can remember I'd been thrown out of several ball games early in that season, and Jim Fanning, the umpires, Vince McNamara, told me that the old commissioner told me that he was going to call the league, or going to call Jim Fanning and John McHale if I got thrown out of any more games. And we were sitting one night right before a game started, and an umpire, we had a real tall umpire, which I hadn't seen before. It had to be 6'7". And jokingly, before we took the lineup out, one of the players sitting by me said, you know, you're not going to be able to look him eye in the eye. Why don't I bring this milk carton, a milk carton that we kept, we used for BP. He said, why don't I bring the milk carton out, and you can get up on the milk carton, and you'll be even with him. I said, that's a good idea. When I go out, you follow me out and set the milk carton down, and I'll get up on it. And anyway, I thought it was a great joke, but the umpire didn't, and he threw me out before the game started. And I can remember pleading with him and said, I told him I didn't use any bad language. What are you throwing me out for? And he said, you're making a travesty of the game. So also remember Andres Galarraga, who had some great years.
Probably our biggest star was Galarraga when I was here. I had him. And
What was he like?
very quiet and spoke very broken English. I've got a great story about Galarraga. I got several of them, but he always, and to this day, when he's going bad, he jumps out. He'll jump, you know. Anyway, I told him, I said, I want you to stay back. He couldn't, you know. I'm telling him, you know, stay back, back. Don't lunge and don't jump out. So I started throwing balls to him. I'd throw just like slow pitch. I'd throw him clear up in the air. I mean, them some bitches had a big, and he'd get watched him and get watched him and get watched him, and I'd say, stay back. Well, the other players got around and they'd laugh. I mean, they were laughing because I said, just keep your weight back and watch. It's like slow pitch. Watch. Anyway, there's a knock on my door, and it's Galarraga. He can't say much. He comes. He's got tears in his eyes. He says, "Pot, no more." No more. So I had to explain. I said, you know, we're not making fun of you. This is trying to get you the, but because everybody was laughing, he was saying, no more of these. Just throw to me like the other players. And then I got on his ass one night we're in Geneva. Geneva. And he was pouting because I didn't start him. And he was also backup catcher. And he wouldn't go out and warm up somebody else has to go out and warm up so I got him a dugout, and I said, from now on, you get your ass out there and warm up the pitcher. If not, you're on a boat tomorrow morning back home to Venezuela. Well, of course, he played for us now in Colorado for 5 or 6 years, but anytime I'd walk in the locker room, he'd say, no boat back to Venezuela. Of course, he speaks English good now. And I said, no more, Cap. You can buy the boat now. You can can buy a big boat, like the Queen Mary.
He's having a hell of a year or two, isn't he?
I can remember a game at Elmira when we were down 9-2 with 2 outs in the 9th inning, and we came back and won that game 10-9. And I can remember Dick Baradino, who was in that league longer than I was. Remember him chasing his players out of the dugout, carrying their clothes. They didn't even get a shower. I can remember a year when Tony Phillips was a young 17-year-old shortstop for us, and really a high-strung kid with a hot temper, and me having a hot temper. We went head-to-head for that whole year. He thought he should be playing at West Palm, and the Expos thought he should be playing at Jamestown. And at that time, he could really play. But after about 14 years in the big leagues, I've really never seen Tony. But a year ago, one of the players told me that Tony Phillips said hello. Tony Phillips said hello to the best manager ever had. And here all these years I was avoiding him, thinking that he probably remembers me as a guy that was on him every day.
Okay, Tony.
Okay, good luck, Jamestown, on your 50th career. I hope you have many more to come.
Thank you very much, Tony.
1972 was my first year in Jamestown, and I went up there as a manager of another ball club, but that year we trained our 2A teams. I was managing Cocoa Beach in the Gulf Coast League that year. Of course, Walt Hereniak was the manager of the Jamestown club, but we brought all the players into Jamestown for 10 days of early training. And obviously we just had College Stadium, and then we had that little softball field that sits up on the hill there. And it seemed like that's where I ended up trying to get my Cocoa Beach team ready to play, and then we flew to Florida. And it was a disastrous year. We won 9 games all summer. And I told the Montreal people that we played like we were still on the Little League field there in Jamestown. I remember John McHale coming in our old locker room during a rain delay and watching the rain trickle down on his new suit. And I thought, well, at least he knows now what the players and the manager is going through in this old locker room, because it used to pour down those steps, and there was some good lockers and bad lockers in that locker room. The good locker was one where you come in after a rain and your clothes were not all soaking wet. I can remember old Bill Steinecke, who was kind of a special assignment guy to Jim Fanning and John McHale, a guy I truly loved. They sent him around to kind of troubleshoot all things. He had been in baseball all of his life. And I can remember him in the early days of all of our June camps up there. He would come in and order all the soup and crackers and things for lunch, and he'd reach up in that old locker room and bring down the soup cookers or the soup boilers, and he'd work with steel wool, scrubbing them, trying to get the rust out of them. And I asked him one time, I said, "Stoney, we've had tomato soup here for the first 6 days," and he said, "There's still just a little bit of rust left in there." He said, "We got to keep eating the tomato soup until the rust doesn't show, and then we'll get into the bean soup and the minestrone." I remember the opening day in 1990 when John Bowles asked me to go back to manage, and at that time I was a scouting supervisor in Florida, but they needed a manager. And I remember opening day, we had a 1-run lead and against Erie, and they had the bases loaded, and I can remember bringing in our closer to end the game, and I forgot to put him on include him on the lineup card, which was terrible embarrassing. And luckily we grabbed a kid off of Troy Ricker, who we were trying to convert to a pitcher, and could really throw nothing but a fastball, had no breaking ball, and I wasn't sure he could even throw a strike. He had been an outfielder for the previous 5 years in our organization, and he came in and got him out.
terrific.
A lot. I've got a lot of interesting, you know, things that happened that you look back on the positive things.
Oh,
you know.
exactly.
So,
And that's what they want to hear tonight. 'Cause
I had just run some of them by you. We had a big linebacker from Eastern Michigan named George Shervish. He looked like a Omar Sharif. He was tough and he was mean and he was tough to handle.
Yep.
But anyway, I had a phone that Pat Mullen, the old hitting instructor we had here, gave to me one time, and it's amazing. If you ring a phone, I don't care if it's in a bar or what, if you ring a phone, everybody will stop. And anyway, I hung this phone in the dugout. I told the guys I'm going to get Shervish because all the girls, he always had 15 girls asked by him, but it just had a little cord on it, and I just pounded a nail in the thing and dug out and hung just a little plastic receiver, hung it up there. But I told one of the pitchers, I said, when Shervish comes in from right field, ring that. So he comes down and gets a drink, and I'm standing on top of the dugout. So the kid with the little buzzer he had in his pocket, and he rang it and rang it. Pretty soon everybody's looking. So I said, Bill, get the phone. And I said, I don't know who in the hell, I just had this thing put in, who in the hell give the number out? But I said, this is a private goddamn phone. So anyway, it rang and rang. So finally I went over and I picked it up. And I said, and then there's no cord. I got the cord just on the nail. And I said, Mike Shervish. Yeah, he's here. Who is this? So Shervish stops. He's like, shit. So I said, Mike, take this time. You know, we're in the middle of a ball game, and whoever in the hell's calling you here, tell them that, you know, you want no more phone calls. This is a Skip's phone in this dugout. So he gets clear back in the corner. He pulls that thing out and gets clear back in the corner. And I thought, he's liable to hit me or throw me clear out of this dugout. But anyway, he started talking and that, and finally he looked at the plastic receiver and threw it down.
Good.
Mike Shervish.
That's beautiful.
Great memories there. I remember the time we had the young Latin pitcher was pitching, and all of a sudden he goes into terrible gyrations on the mound, runs around the mound, falls down, flopping around, and Jeff Porter runs out, our trainer, who's now a trainer with the Atlanta Braves. He runs out and I run out, and the kid is absolutely delirious and screaming, and Porter gets his flashlight out. The kid's holding his ear. He gets his little pin light out and a pair of tweezers he had on him, and pulls a huge moth that I swear would be impossible to get into someone's ear. But that moth had flown and gotten in that kid's ear, which obviously upset his equilibrium and horrified him, which it probably would if it happened to any of us. Oh, golly, I remember seeing a baseball facility that was very, very poor in the early 70s. I can remember one Sunday afternoon when the groundskeeper was in no shape to prepare the field, that we dug the field by hand. And then I watched that field slowly transform into a beautiful park that it is today. I remember Tommy Kassler, the day that he took over as our groundskeeper. And from that day forward, our field got better every day he worked. I remember the constant support of Russ Diethrick. He was behind every positive thing that happened with our team in all those years in Jamestown. I remember the Bluebird bus lines, who improved their service from buses that we literally had to push on a couple occasions to the top of the line charters. I remember the beautiful towns, lakes, and people throughout upstate New York, which was a switch for me coming out of the Middle West. And probably most of all, I remember Jamestown and its great people as being my first step into the great world of professional baseball. And again, I want to thank you for this opportunity. Give my regards to Jim Riggs, to Russ Diethrick, Charlie Ride, and all my other friends up there. I appreciate it. Take care.
He had a history of doing the unusual. One night we had a rain delay, and we were all in the locker room, and it's just been announced over the PA system And almost immediately after that, the two umpires come into the room furious, wanting to know who called the game. And I said, well, I figured you did. You guys are in charge of it. And he said, no, somebody else called the game. And finally someone said that Mitch Cipolla was up in the PA box. Well, Mitch said he had always wanted to be a TV or a radio or TV announcer, and he was just trying his voice out on the PA and made the announcement that tonight's game's canceled today.
Pat was beginning to get mad because it was dragging on, and Pat was really concerned that Max was just going to lose it. But the worst part was if you were there, it was bad. The fans were booing just because you didn't know what was going on. And it was a real lull when you were there. When you saw it, there on film, it's fantastic because you had some sound. So I remember the fans were having a fit.
After the season was over each year, is this close enough? We make the players check for the get home on expenses, and many of those players would, during the season, would come out and borrow $100 or $200, and I'd take that out of that last check. This happened this morning, and Galarraga was there, and he said, "Will you drive me up to the airport?" And I said, "Sure." And when the other players got their money, I took him to the airport, and on the way up, Galarraga said, "I don't understand why these people have to borrow any money." He said, "I had so much money, I had over $300 in my savings account." That was something for hard to believe, because the kids spent money on liquor and girls and everything else, but not Galarraga. He had a girl he was in love with from his hometown, and he never went out, never did anything. One other thing that Galarraga did in a playoff game, it was the ninth inning, and we were 1 run behind, and he hit a long ball that went out the center field fence and hit right on the inside corner of the fence. And instead of going over, it bounced back in the air, and he got a double out of it. We lost the game by 1 run. If it had been an inch higher, it would have gone over. Pat, it's great to hear from you again, and I enjoyed it a lot. Many memories. Thank you.
That's terrific. Thank you. Pete, I'm going to do something. I'm going to have you. Okay, I'm ready when you are.
All right. Hi, Pat. Kerry Kellogg here. A couple of quick stories, reminiscing a little bit. Back in 1979, we were on the road and only on our last series, and I happened to go in and pitch the last 6 innings of a ball game, where I did quite well to end the ball game, and Jeff Porter brought me into the locker room and iced me down, and he had a roll of rings on the side of his pocket. So we started going through those rings, and we opened up some of the doors inside the locker room, and lo and behold was a huge barrel of Yankee uniforms that's been sent down. And I looked at Jeff, and he looked back at me, and he knew what I was thinking, because I had been a Yankee fan all my life. And he said to me, "All right, just take one." So I took number 27. It was an outfielder by the name of, I think it was Elliot Maddox. And I think I made more money off that uniform than I did in the 2 years in the minor leagues. The next story was the next year, 1980, when we had a lot of games on the road. I don't remember if it was July or August. And we had a terrible month. I think we lost 20 out of 29, and you were finding everybody on the team for anything. And one night I don't know if it was Geneva or Little Falls, but I had met a young lady during the ball game, or before the ball game actually, in the bullpen, and she asked me to come over that night, and I didn't know if I could sneak out because you were on the rampage, and I think you were a little low on money that month. So I did wait till you came by to check all the rooms, and I was in there with Larry Glasscock, and they were all laying on the bed playing a couple games, and there was a pair of feet at the end of the bed, and it wasn't me. and you didn't even take time to look to see who was in the bed. But anyway, about 3 o'clock in the morning, I come through the front door of the hotel room, and I heard your voice, and I think you were working on your statistics in the bar room. And it was about closing time, and there was a little closet off to the right, and they had all the jackets in there, probably the customers, or I don't know who they belonged to. But I hid behind one of them until I guess you were on your way back to the room. And this lady came out, and she looked into the closet, she got her jacket, and my face was right behind that jacket. And she screamed. And you come running out, and you didn't say anything but $25. Anyway, those are a couple of stories I remember. It was good to hear from you, Pat, and maybe we'll be in touch some other time.
Perfect.
Well, Pat, it's good to hear from you again, and can reminisce. And you know, the thing about reminiscing, it takes some of the sharp edges off and brightens some of the shadows. I have a lot of good, fond memories of your time with the Expos and your being here in Jamestown. And I was glad to see in part of your reminiscing, and Greg put the pictures together, that you were constantly not only training ball players, but you spent a lot of time training umpires. And a lot of that happened here in Jamestown. And your reputation precedes you, I'm sure, no matter where you go, as far as that's concerned. But when Greg was flashing on the stand or on the screen some of the rosters and some of the lineups, and boy, there was a lot of major league ball players and a lot of great young men that you touched down at the stadium and through the highlight of the Expos here in Jamestown, and put a lot of them on some major league rosters. And I'm sure as an individual like Tony Phillips and a lot of them felt you were probably one of the best managers that was in their life and had touched them. Because just the things that Kerry shared with you, that you were human, that you were understanding, you were a taskmaster, and all of those things were important. One of the things I can recognize now, more so than what was going on, and you touched about it a little bit in your comments about the community. You were a community person. You helped sell the ball club not only between the chalk lines and in the dugout, but you helped sell the baseball program here in Jamestown to the community. You were well respected by all of the fans and all of the local management people, but the person on the street in Jamestown was really the nuts and bolts of professional baseball here in the community, respected and loved you so much no matter where you were, whether you were in or out of the stadium. And that we're indebted to you for that, and will be forever. And a lot of the good memories that we remember and think about, as far as I'm concerned and others, the name of Pat Daugherty comes up often, and we're so very pleased and proud that you're part of the history of our program here in Jamestown. Thank you.
Terrific. All right, Greg. All right, Jim, it's all yours. Okay, Pat, it's Jim minus that hair from back in the 70s and 80s. Thanks for bringing up the name. I was telling Greg the story the other day and couldn't remember the name, and you brought it up, Mike Shervish, the ladies' man. Good story about Mike. You were standing out at third, you're coaching, and the inning was already on, and the batter due up to the plate was Mike Shervish. And so the batter at the plate, he grounded out or whatever, and it's time for Mike to come up to the plate, and there's nobody on deck, and you're standing out of the box, and you're looking in the dugout, and there's no Shervish. Everybody's looking around for him. The umpire finally says you got to put somebody in, so that you put in a pinch hitter. And this, I think, was early in the game, and you didn't want to lose Mike that early. So in comes the new guy. He's up there to bat, and pretty soon from behind the dugout and through the gate arrives Mike Shervish. Well, of course, I wanted to know what was going on, which you filled me in afterwards. Mike had to go to the John, and he'd gone to the John and missed his time at bat. And that you were rather ticked about the whole affair, but then you told me afterwards, when the inning was over, Mike, he came up to you and he said, I just want you to know, Pat, I'm I'm not mad at you for pulling me from the game, which you didn't go ahead and strangle him then, I remember that. But one of the best stories was, you'll remember pitcher Glenn Kins, who was, I can't remember, a starter or a reliever, but you yanked him out of a game. And of course, Pat, you've been a coach and a manager for all these years. You teach team is important, I's not important, everything's for the team. You yank Kins out of the game, and you're out there on the mound with the new pitcher. And when you got back to the dugout, you found Kins was over in the corner with his back to you, which you went over to find him with a piece of paper and a pen figuring out his ERA, which you weren't too pleased about that. I think that's enough of the stories for now. I want to keep you on an even keel. Thanks for the time, Pat. We'll see you.
Sure. Anybody else have a recollection?
Went into his ear, and you know the guy was going to the end.
Pat, I can't help but bring back memories as Pat Morrell talked about Galarraga putting money in the bank during the season here in Jamestown. You most certainly must have put some money in the bank, because your per diem payment, you never had to spend it because you lived in the coach's quarters under College Stadium in those days. And I can remember going down there after you had been out one night after baseball doing the things you needed to do in the community, and you were still paying the price for that early that next morning. And there was about 8 inches of water on the floor, and it was about 2 inches above your cot, and you couldn't understand why you and everything you owned was soaking wet. And that was some of the things that you were so generous when you said the less than favorable conditions at the stadium at the time. But because you stuck with it and suffered through it, and now we have a beautiful stadium for people to use and to utilize as a training facility for minor league baseball. But for getting your per diem money, I hope you invested it wisely, and because you certainly made enough during the years you were here by not paying motel bills and living out of the concession stand.
All the stories you hear about, I just told Bob Gabhart, he said to tell everybody hello, but probably of the 20 years I was with Montreal, you know, there's probably more stories with Jamestown, or everybody wanted to come to Jamestown, and you know, Eddie Creech, a lot of guys Kevin got to be here, Frank was here, Eddie Creech got to manage here, Bob Bailey managed here, but from all of those people, you know, it was the Jamestown story. And it's, you know, Gab told me, he said, you be sure you go down to the pub, because, you know, that's where we all hung out. And there always used to be a joke that they've got a gold seat in there where Daugherty sat, because I used to, you know, I kept Jim in business down there with all the beer I drank.
Yeah. As a postscript to these stories about Pat Daugherty, we recently came across one of the foremost pitchers in Jamestown history, Randy St. Clair, who found his way from Jamestown to Indianapolis to the Montreal Expos. He was, in 2002, a minor league pitching instructor. Here are his remembrances. Close your eyes and you think of Pat Daugherty.
I don't need to close my eyes. I can think of Pat. What a great guy. An intense human being. What a fire, you know, just a fireball of intensity. And a great guy, a great teacher, and really a first-class guy on the baseball field, no doubt.
The current assistant general manager of the Florida Marlins is Jim Fleming. Jim Fleming, though, spent much of his career in the Montreal Expos organization. He is a 1973 graduate of the University of Arizona. His coaching career began in 1974 when he was a coach at the University of Arizona, moved to Pima Community College in 1975, where he coached until 1987, and then in 1988 he became a coach at the University of Oklahoma, where he remained until he became a scout for the Expos in 1990. In 1991, In '92, he was the batting coach for the Jamestown Expos. Here is his Pat Daugherty story. Story? Everybody does.
Everybody's got the funniest one for me was when I just signed with the Expos, I went right to Instructional League, and John Bowles was the farm director, and so he was getting me in, and we had a meeting. The day before, we were bringing in and having an organizational meeting, so all the scouts and all the player development people were coming in, so we were working Instructional League. And John went out of his way and said, hey, all the scouts are going to be in tomorrow, and we're going to talk about players, and you know, don't try to be tactful, don't say bad things about players, and you know, and you tell the truth, but do it in a nice way. And he made a big point of it and went on and on. And so the next day we started out, and the first team we talked about was the Jamestown Expos. And so Pat was the manager, and so he had to talk. And so Pat gets up, and the first player, I forget who it was, I don't want to say it anyway, he said, Joe Schmo, and he said, this guy's awful. And he didn't say it quite that cleanly. I think he said he was horseshit. and he went on and he said, this guy's brutal. And he said, I don't know who signed this guy. And then he looked down and he said, oh, I signed him. and I looked over at John Bowles and I said, John, is that what you meant by being tactful? Pat, you know, everybody's got Pat Daugherty stories, so he's a great guy.